Most people will watch this video, nod along, maybe even save it for later. And then they'll go right back to doing the same things they did yesterday. Same patterns, same results, same quiet frustration that something isn't working, but you can't quite name what it is. I know that feeling. I lived in it for years. Consuming content, collecting ideas, stacking knowledge, and then waking up every morning feeling exactly the same. But here's what's different about what I'm about to share with you. These aren't motivational ideas. These aren't things you need to believe in for them to work. These are 8 specific, small, almost invisible behaviors that neuroscience has shown physically change the wiring of your brain. Not in months, not after some dramatic wake-up call, but quietly, daily, through repetition so small your conscious mind barely registers it happening. I spent years studying discipline, mental frameworks, samurai philosophy, behavioral psychology, the mechanics of how people actually change, not how they wish they'd change. And the one pattern I kept seeing in every single system that actually produced results was this. The transformation never started with something big. It started with something so small it felt almost pointless. And that's exactly what made it powerful. The smallness was the strategy. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just what these habits are, but why your brain responds to them the way it does. And I've deliberately structured this so that the most transformative habit, the one that acts as a multiplier for everything else, comes last. If you only have time to adopt one thing from this video, stay until the end. That's the one. And it might not be what you expect. If this is the kind of content that makes you think differently about how you build your life, hit subscribe. I break down discipline, mental strategy, and the psychology of real change every week, and one video might be the one that rewires how you approach everything. Let me start by telling you something that most self-improvement content won't. Your brain doesn't care about your goals. It genuinely does not care. Your brain cares about patterns. It cares about energy conservation. It cares about keeping you alive with the least amount of effort possible. That's not a flaw in the system. That's millions of years of evolution doing exactly what it was designed to do, optimizing for survival, not for fulfillment, not for growth, not for the kind of life you actually want to live. Researchers have found that approximately 40% of what we do every single day isn't actually decided by us in the moment. It's automated. It's habit. Your brain handed those behaviors off to a region called the basal ganglia, a cluster of structures deep in the cerebrum responsible for motor control and procedural learning. And it runs these behaviors like background software, so your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that handles complex thinking, planning, and decision-making, doesn't have to waste precious metabolic energy on them. Think about that for a second. Nearly half of your daily life is running on autopilot. And the question nobody is asking is, who programmed the autopilot? For most people, the honest answer is deeply uncomfortable. Nobody did. It programmed itself. Random patterns that happened to get repeated enough times became the operating system of your entire life. A behavior that happened 3 times became a tendency. A tendency that lasted a month became a default. A default that ran long enough became identity. And here's the terrifying part. You might be living inside an identity that was never chosen, only repeated. The reason this matters so deeply, the reason this is the most important context for everything I'm about to tell you, is because neuroscience has shown us something critical. Your brain doesn't distinguish between a good habit and a bad habit. It treats them identically. Both get the same neurological treatment. Both get automated through the same mechanism. Both become part of who you are through repetition alone. The process works like this. When you first try a new behavior, your prefrontal cortex is heavily involved. It's making decisions, weighing options, exercising self-control. This takes enormous energy, which is why new behaviors feel exhausting, and why willpower feels like a finite resource, because it essentially is. The prefrontal cortex can only maintain that level of engagement for so long. But as you repeat the behavior, something shifts. Control gradually transfers from the prefrontal cortex to the basal ganglia. The behavior becomes faster, smoother, more automatic. And each time you perform it, dopamine, your brain's reward and reinforcement neurotransmitter, strengthens the neural pathway, making it even easier to repeat next time. This is the habit loop that neuroscientists describe. A cue triggers the behavior produces a reward, and the reward tells your brain to encode the loop for future use. With enough repetitions, what started as a conscious effort becomes an unconscious default. So, what does this mean for you, practically? It means you don't need more willpower. You don't need more motivation. You don't need another dramatic Monday morning reset where you promise yourself this time will be different. You need better inputs. Small, deliberate, repeated inputs that your brain can't help but wire into your default operating system. A landmark study by Philippa Lally and her research team at University College London found that, on average, it takes about 66 days for a new behavior to become automatic. But here's the part most people miss. The range was enormous, from 18 days all the way to 254 days, depending on the complexity of the behavior and the individual. Simple actions became habitual much faster than complex ones. Exercise behaviors took about 1.5 times longer than eating or drinking behaviors. And crucially, missing a single day didn't reset the process. The researchers found that one missed opportunity had a negligible effect on overall habit formation, less than 1/3 of a point on their automaticity scale. Your brain is more forgiving than you think. It's not tracking perfection, it's tracking the trend. And as long as the trend points toward repetition, the wiring continues. So, here are 8 tiny habits, backed by neuroscience, that quietly transform your life from the inside out. I've deliberately ordered these from foundational to most impactful. All of them work. But one of them is different. One of them changes the game entirely. Let's begin. Habit number 1. Every morning, before you check your phone, before you look at a single notification, sit still for 60 seconds and do nothing. That's it. No meditation app, no special breathing technique, no guided session, no timer if you don't want one. Just 60 seconds of sitting still with your eyes open or closed, being present in the room with your own mind. Here's what's happening in your brain when you do this. The moment you wake up, your brain transitions from the slow delta and theta waves of sleep into the faster alpha and beta wave activity of waking consciousness. This transition period is neurologically sensitive, almost delicate. What you expose your brain to in those first minutes shapes the neurochemical tone for the rest of your day. When you immediately grab your phone, you're flooding your brain with external stimuli, triggering cortisol spikes, fragmenting your attention across dozens of micro-decisions, and activating your brain's threat detection systems before you've even stood up. Your amygdala fires. Your stress response engages. Your brain goes from 0 to reactive in seconds. And that reactive state becomes the emotional baseline you carry into every interaction, every task, every decision for the rest of the morning. But when you sit still for 60 seconds, you allow your prefrontal cortex to come online gradually, on its own terms. You give your brain a chance to establish a baseline of calm clarity before the world starts making demands. Over weeks and months of repetition, this tiny window of stillness trains your brain to default to a state of controlled awareness rather than reactive anxiety. It's not about being Zen. It's not about achieving some elevated state of consciousness. It's about giving your command center a clean boot-up sequence instead of a chaotic one. And 60 seconds is short enough that your brain won't resist it. That's the whole strategy. Habit number 2. Write down one specific thing you will accomplish today. Not a to-do list, not 10 priorities competing for your attention. Not vague aspirations like be productive or work on my project. One concrete, specific, achievable thing. I will finish the introduction of my report. I will have the difficult conversation with my colleague. I will complete a 30-minute workout. One thing, written down with pen on paper, before you start your day. The reason this works goes deep into how your brain processes intention. Neuroscience research on what psychologists call implementation intentions has shown that when you define a specific action in advance, your brain essentially preloads the neural pathway for that behavior. It's like entering a destination into GPS before you start driving. The route becomes clearer, obstacles become more predictable, and your brain starts filtering the world through the lens of that specific goal. It activates your reticular activating system, the part of your brainstem that determines what you pay attention to out of the millions of stimuli hitting your senses every second. Without a clear intention, your brain defaults to whatever feels urgent, novel, or emotionally stimulating, which, in the modern world, saturated with notifications and content, usually means scrolling, reacting, and putting out fires that don't actually matter. One clear written intention each morning doesn't just organize your day, it programs your brain's attention filter. And attention, not time, not energy, not talent. Attention is the single most valuable resource you own. Where your attention goes, your neural pathways grow. That's not poetry, that's neuroplasticity in its simplest and most practical form. Habit number 3. Move your body for at least 10 minutes before noon. I'm not talking about a structured workout. I'm not talking about a gym session or a training plan. I'm talking about any form of deliberate physical movement. A walk around the block. Stretches in your living room, push-ups in your hallway, dancing in your kitchen to a song that makes you feel alive. The form genuinely does not matter. What matters is the timing and the consistency. Physical movement triggers the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which neuroscientists sometimes refer to as fertilizer for the brain. BDNF strengthens existing neural connections and promotes the growth of new ones. It enhances memory formation. It sharpens focus and concentration. It improves your brain's ability to learn new information and adapt to new challenges. Research has shown that even a moderate 20-minute walk significantly improves cognitive clarity and emotional regulation for hours afterward. Your brain literally functions better when your body has moved. But here's the key insight that most fitness content completely ignores. The neurological benefit isn't proportional to intensity. It's proportional to consistency. 10 minutes of movement every single day rewires your brain more effectively than an intense 2-hour session you do twice a week and then skip for a month. Your brain doesn't care about your best day. It cares about your average day. It's tracking the trend, not the peaks. So, stop waiting until you feel like exercising. Make the bar so impossibly low, 10 minutes, any movement, no special equipment, that the only way to fail is to not show up at all. Once you're moving, the dopamine and endorphin release often carries you well beyond the minimum. But the minimum is all that's required for the neurological rewiring to happen. The goal isn't the workout. The goal is the pattern. Habit number 4. When you catch yourself having a negative internal monologue, pause and rephrase it as a question. Instead of thinking, I always fail at this. Ask yourself, what specifically went wrong last time and what's one thing I could do differently? Instead of, I'm not disciplined enough, ask, what specific situation triggered me to break my commitment, and how can I redesign that situation? Instead of, nothing ever works for me, ask, what have I tried that partially worked, and what made that different? This isn't positive thinking. I'm not asking you to lie to yourself or paste affirmations over pain. This is cognitive reframing, and it's one of the most well-studied techniques in behavioral neuroscience. It's the foundation of cognitive behavioral therapy, which multiple studies have shown can actually produce measurable changes in brain activity patterns, physically altering how your neural circuits respond to stress. Here's what's happening inside your head when you do this. When you make a negative declarative statement, your brain treats it as a conclusion. The case is closed. The processing stops. The brain files it as an established fact and moves on, usually into a cascade of related negative conclusions, each one reinforcing the last, building a spiral that feels like truth but is actually just pattern momentum. But when you transform that same thought into a genuine question, something profoundly different happens neurologically. You activate your prefrontal cortex's problem-solving circuits. You shift from a fixed, emotional, amygdala-driven response to an active, analytical one. The brain transitions from reactive mode to executive mode. It stops defending a conclusion and starts exploring possibilities. Over time, and this is the transformative part, this doesn't just change how you feel in isolated moments. It literally rewires the default pathways your brain uses when it encounters stress, failure, or setback. Instead of spiraling into rumination, which neuroscience has linked to depression, anxiety, and chronic stress, your brain learns to automatically shift into solution mode. Psychologists call this cognitive flexibility, and research consistently shows it's one of the strongest predictors of long-term mental resilience, stronger than IQ, stronger than talent, stronger than raw motivation. The ability to take a negative input and automatically reprocess it through a different lens, and you can train it with nothing more than a question. Habit number 5. Before every meal, take 3 slow, deliberate breaths. Not as a ritual, not as a spiritual practice, as a neurological reset. When you eat in a stressed state, your sympathetic nervous system is dominant. Your body is in fight-or-flight mode. Digestion slows or halts entirely. Cortisol stays elevated. You eat faster, make worse food choices, barely taste your food, and your body stores more of what you consume as fat because it interprets the stress hormones as a signal that resources might be scarce, and survival is uncertain. 3 slow breaths before eating shift your nervous system into parasympathetic dominance, the rest and digest state. Your heart rate drops, your blood pressure decreases, blood flow redirects toward your digestive system. Your brain stops scanning for threats and allows you to be present with the act of nourishing yourself. Over time, this tiny habit transforms your entire relationship with food, without diets, without calorie counting, without willpower battles. You eat more slowly. You notice satiety earlier. You make more intentional choices, and your body processes what you eat more efficiently because it's no longer operating in survival mode. This might sound too simple to matter. That's exactly the point. The habits that last, the ones that actually rewire your behavior at the neurological level, are the ones that require almost zero effort to perform, but trigger meaningful change through sheer repetition. If a habit requires heroic effort, it's not really a habit. It's a performance, and performances always end. Habits compound. Now, before I get to habit number 6, let me pause for a second. If you've been watching this and thinking about how these small changes connect to a larger system of mental control, That's exactly the kind of thinking that led me to create something called the KMA method. It stands for 5 minutes a day for mental control and inner calm. Not theory, not motivational speeches. A specific, structured daily system you can use every single morning to take command of your mental state before the world tries to do it for you. Thousands of people are already using it, and the most common thing they tell me is that they can't believe how much shifted from something that takes less time than brewing a cup of coffee. I'll tell you more about it at the end, from a different angle. But for now, let's keep going. These next 3 habits build on everything we've covered, and the last one changes everything. Habit number 6. At the end of each day, write down one thing that went well and why it went well. Not a gratitude list, not 5 things, not a long journal entry. One specific thing that went well, followed by your brief analysis of why it went well. This distinction matters more than you might think. Research using brain imaging has found that when your brain is in a state of positive reflection, activity increases in the hippocampus and the midbrain's dopaminergic pathways, the same regions responsible for memory consolidation and motivation. But generic gratitude, the I'm grateful for my health, my family, my home variety, tends to lose its neurological impact quickly because it becomes repetitive and abstract. Your brain stops registering it as novel information. The and why part is what makes this habit fundamentally different. When you explain why something went well, you force your brain to identify patterns of success. You're not just noting a positive event. You're training your neural circuitry to recognize and encode the specific behaviors, decisions, and circumstances that led to positive outcomes. Over weeks and months of practice, this doesn't just make you more grateful. It fundamentally changes what your brain pays attention to throughout the day. Instead of its default evolutionary setting, which is scanning for threats, problems, and everything that could go wrong, your brain starts automatically noticing opportunities, progress, and evidence that your actions are producing real results. Neuroscientists describe this as attentional bias retraining. You're literally reprogramming what your brain considers important enough to surface to your conscious awareness. And the timing matters strategically. Doing this at night, in those final minutes before sleep, is deliberate. Recent neuroscience research suggests that reactivating positive memories before sleep may help reduce emotional distress and strengthen psychological resilience, because your brain does its deepest memory consolidation work during sleep cycles. What you feed it in those final waking minutes determines what gets processed, reinforced, and integrated overnight. Most people scroll through news or social media before bed, feeding their brain a cocktail of anxiety, comparison, outrage, and blue light. Then they wonder why they wake up feeling heavy and unfocused. This habit reverses that process entirely. Habit number 7. Once a day, do something with your non-dominant hand. Open a door, stir your coffee, brush your teeth. Pick up a glass, write a few words. Anything small and routine, but do it with the hand you normally don't use. This one sounds almost silly. I understand that, but the neuroscience behind it is remarkably solid. Researchers in neuroplasticity, including Dr. Michael Merzenich, one of the true pioneers in the field, and a winner of the Kavli Prize for Neuroscience, have advocated for exactly this kind of micro-challenge as a way to build and maintain new neural pathways. When you perform a familiar task with your non-dominant hand, you force your brain to engage motor and coordination regions that are normally dormant during that activity. You're creating novel communication between brain hemispheres and activating circuits that have been coasting on autopilot for years, sometimes decades. The result is enhanced cognitive flexibility, which is a technical way of saying your brain gets measurably better at adapting to new situations, solving problems from unfamiliar angles, and maintaining sharpness as you age. And here's the part that matters for long-term brain health. Cognitive decline isn't primarily caused by aging. It's caused by routine. When your brain does the same things the same way every single day for years on end, it starts pruning the neural connections it doesn't actively use. This process, called synaptic pruning, is efficient from an energy standpoint, but devastating for adaptability and resilience. Novelty, even micro-novelty as small as using your left hand to stir your morning coffee, sends a daily signal to your brain. Stay flexible, keep building. Don't shut down pathways just because they're not on the main route. The compound cognitive returns on that 30-second daily investment are genuinely significant, and they grow with each passing month. Now, habit number 8, this is the one I told you to wait for, the one I've deliberately saved for last. It's the habit that, in my experience, studying everything from Miyamoto Musashi to modern neuroscience, from Stoic philosophy to behavioral psychology, creates the most dramatic and far-reaching shift when practiced consistently. And it's the one that most people will instinctively resist the most, because it goes against everything our modern world conditions us to do. Habit number 8 is this. Every day, spend at least 5 minutes in complete silence with absolutely no input. No music, no podcast, no audiobook, no television murmuring in the background. No one talking to you. No phone in your hand or even in your line of sight. Just you, sitting or standing or walking, in the total absence of external stimulation. Here's why this one occupies the throne at the very top of this list. We live in the era of permanent input. Your brain is being fed information, opinions, emotions, notifications, content, arguments, advertisements, entertainment, and noise every single waking second of your existence. And your brain is processing all of it, whether you consciously choose to engage with it or not. Every single piece of input requires neural processing power. Every notification triggers a micro-decision. Every piece of background noise, even the kind you think you've completely tuned out, occupies bandwidth in your auditory cortex and attention networks that could be deployed elsewhere. So, let me ask you a question that might be deeply uncomfortable. When was the last time your brain got to think its own thoughts? When did it last have the space to consolidate what it's learned, to process what it's experienced, to hear the quiet signals from your subconscious that are trying to tell you something important about the trajectory of your life? For most people living in the modern world, the honest answer is almost never. They go from stimulus to stimulus from the moment they open their eyes to the moment they lose consciousness at night. Podcast on the commute, music at the gym, news during lunch, social media in every 2-minute gap, television until their eyes close. The brain is being fed constantly, relentlessly, and it never, ever gets the space to digest. And then these same people wonder why they feel mentally foggy, disconnected from their own instincts, unable to think clearly about what they actually want from their life, making the same decisions on autopilot, trapped in cycles they can feel but can't articulate. It's not a mystery. It's a brain that's been running at full input capacity with zero dedicated processing time, like a computer that never stops downloading and never gets to run its own programs. 5 minutes of deliberate silence does something that no other habit on this list can do. It creates space. And in that space, your brain starts doing something remarkable. It activates what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a constellation of interconnected brain regions that become specifically active when you're not focused on the external world. This network handles self-reflection, future planning, autobiographical memory processing, creative problem-solving, and making meaning from your experiences. It's where genuine insight happens. It's where your brain connects dots that your conscious, task-focused mind completely missed. It's where you have the thoughts that actually change your direction. And here's the critical point. This network can only do its full, deep work when you stop feeding your brain external input. As long as there's a podcast playing, a screen glowing, or a notification pinging, your brain allocates resources to processing those inputs, and the default mode network stays suppressed. You're essentially keeping your brain's most powerful self-repair and self-guidance system permanently offline. Research on deliberate silence and periods of reduced stimulation has shown that people who practice this regularly develop increased gray matter density in brain regions associated with emotional regulation, self-awareness, and complex decision-making. These aren't just calmer people. They're neurologically different from people who never give their brain silence. Their brains have physically restructured themselves to process life with more clarity and less reactivity. The hardware has literally changed shape. I can tell you from personal experience that this was the single habit that made everything else fall into place. I used to fill every moment with something. Podcasts while walking, music while cooking, news articles while eating. My brain never had a single unoccupied moment. I thought I was being productive. I thought I was learning constantly. What I was actually doing was drowning my brain's own signal in a flood of external noise. I was so busy consuming other people's thoughts that my brain never had the chance to develop its own. When I started giving it just 5 minutes of pure silence each day, the clarity that emerged was almost unsettling at first. I started making better decisions because I could actually hear my own thinking for the first time. I started noticing patterns in my behavior that I had been completely blind to for years. I started understanding what I genuinely wanted versus what the content I consumed told me I should want. Silence didn't give me answers. It gave me the ability to finally hear the questions my brain had been trying to ask. And the deep irony is this. In a world that constantly sells you tools, apps, systems, courses, frameworks, and gadgets to improve your life, the single most powerful thing you can do is regularly give your brain nothing. Absolute nothing. That's where the real rewiring happens. Not in the noise, in the silence between. So why do I place this above every other habit on this list? Because it's the meta habit. It's the habit that makes every other habit work better. When your brain has regular access to silence, its ability to consolidate the learning from those other 7 habits increases dramatically. Its ability to regulate the emotions that might otherwise derail those habits improves measurably. Its ability to recognize and reinforce positive patterns becomes sharper and faster. Silence is the operating system upgrade. Everything else on this list is an application. Without the upgraded operating system, the applications run slow, glitch, and crash. With it, every habit, every decision, every response to every situation runs on fundamentally better hardware. The samurai understood this centuries ago. Miyamoto Musashi wrote extensively about the importance of emptiness, of the void, of training the mind to sit comfortably in absolute stillness before and after the chaos of battle. He wasn't being mystical or esoteric. He was being coldly, practically tactical. A warrior who cannot be still in his own mind is a warrior who will react instead of respond. And reaction, whether in sword fighting or in everyday life, is almost always inferior to response. Modern neuroscience now confirms what ancient warriors knew through thousands of hours of lived practice. The mind that regularly touches silence is the mind that performs best when the stakes are highest. Let me tie everything together with one final thought. These 8 habits work because they operate at the exact level where your brain actually processes change, repetition, reward, and pattern recognition. The neurological habit loop consists of three components: a cue that triggers the behavior, the routine, which is the behavior itself, and the reward that reinforces it, signaling your brain to encode that loop for future automatic execution. Every habit on this list was deliberately chosen to be so small that the friction to starting is almost zero. That's not an accident. That's the core strategy. Your brain resists change because change requires energy, and your brain is fundamentally, stubbornly, brilliantly an energy conservation machine. But when the change is tiny, when it's 60 seconds of stillness, or 3 breaths before a meal, or writing a single line in a notebook, your prefrontal cortex doesn't raise an alarm. The resistance system doesn't activate. The behavior slips past your brain's defenses. And with each repetition, the basal ganglia starts encoding it as an automatic pattern. Dopamine reinforces the loop. The neural pathway strengthens. The myelin sheath thickens around the relevant nerve fibers, and slowly, imperceptibly, the behavior stops being something you do and becomes something you are. This is the compound effect at work, not dramatic transformation overnight, not a before and after montage, but a slow, steady, invisible accumulation of neural pathway changes that, over weeks and months, rebuild your default operating system from the inside out. And the beauty of this approach is that it's resilient to imperfection. You don't need a flawless streak. The research by Lally's team at UCL showed that missing one day had virtually no measurable impact on the overall habit formation process. Your brain isn't keeping a perfect attendance record. It's tracking the trend. And as long as the trend moves in the direction of consistency, the wiring continues building. Here's what I want to leave you with. I've studied dozens of mental models. I've read hundreds of books on discipline, psychology, and behavioral change. I've broken down the philosophies of samurai, stoics, ancient warriors, and modern cognitive scientists. And the single thread that connects everything that actually works, the through line across every system, every philosophy, every research paper that produced real results, is this: the people who build extraordinary lives don't do extraordinary things. They do ordinary things with extraordinary consistency. They don't rely on bursts of inspiration or moments of motivation. They build systems so small that motivation becomes completely irrelevant. They understand at a deep level that the brain is a machine that can be programmed, not through force, not through willpower, not through some imagined mental toughness, but through patience, repetition, and strategic silence. Now, if you watch this far, you're not someone who passively consumes content and moves on. You're someone who wants to actually implement. And that brings me back to something I mentioned earlier, the KMA method. 5 minutes a day for mental control and inner calm. If what I shared in this video resonated with you, if something in this lit up a recognition that this is the approach you've been searching for, then this method takes these exact principles and structures them into a specific daily system you can start tomorrow morning. It's the framework I personally use every single day, and it's the reason I can talk about these ideas not as theory, but as lived practice. The link is in the description below. And I'll tell you this, the people who commit to it consistently don't come back saying it was life-changing because of the information inside. They say it because of what happens inside them when they finally give their brain a system instead of scattered random attempts at self-improvement. That is the difference between consuming ideas and installing them into your neural architecture. I want to hear from you, and I mean that genuinely. Of these 8 habits, which one do you think would create the biggest shift in your life right now? Drop it in the comments. Don't just give me a number. Tell me why. What is it about where you are right now, the specific challenges you're facing, the patterns you're trying to break, that makes that particular habit feel like the missing piece. Because here's what's interesting. When you take the time to articulate that out loud, to put language to the gap you feel, you're already engaging the exact part of your brain that transforms vague intention into concrete action. You're already starting to build the neural pathway. The best conversations on this channel happen in the comments, and I read every single one. If, someone who's been stuck in the same patterns, going through the same cycles, doing the same things week after week, but somehow expecting different results, send them this video. Not as advice, not as a lecture, not as a subtle hint, just as a perspective that might land differently than everything else they've heard. Sometimes one video, one reframe, one tiny habit is enough to crack the surface of a life that's been frozen in place. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Every week I break down the mental strategies, the psychology, and the philosophy that separate people who talk about change from people who actually live it. This isn't motivation. This is architecture. And the next blueprint is already being built. I'll see you there.